Hi, everybody. Today, Cam and I have the pleasure of bringing you Dr. Stephanie Manka, who is a wildlife biologist and digital content creator. Thanks so much for being here with us today, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited to get to talk to you about sort of your background, how you ended up where you are today, and the stuff that you're doing more recently with digital content creation around wildlife biology and conservation. So, maybe to kick us off, can I ask what uh, sort of brought you to transition from those more traditional wildlife biologist roles to the digital content creation you're doing now with Fancy Scientists?
That's a great question. It was a long and slow transition. So, as you mentioned, I started off as a traditional wildlife biologist. And I found out about wildlife biology later in my career or later in my academic college career. I knew about it my last year. And then I decided to go for it full force. I had a couple of internships afterward, and then I went to get my PhD and I had a postdoc. And I started to make the transition towards the end of my postdoc, and there were a couple of factors that influenced me. One was that I really love doing outreach. I discovered outreach when I was doing my PhD. I just was on Twitter and I was working on a blog with another friend, and I just really liked communicating science. And then I did my postdoc at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, and they really care about scientific communication. So outreach was really encouraged. And I was able to work with a really fun boss, Dr. Roland Kays, who, although he's an amazing scientist, he's also a really great science communicator. So we would do things like make videos, and just being part of the museum, you had to give talks. At least once a month, we were giving talks, but usually we were asked more. So I just really loved this. And then I also started blogging on my own because what I discovered was I felt like I was doing all this cool research, but it wasn't really reaching that many people. Like not many people knew about it. So I would publish a paper, which is great in your job as a scientist, but then only maybe a couple of dozen people will read it that year. So outreach, and I was also working on an animal that I love. A lot of people think are really cool, which are forest elephants, and people don't really know them. And when I started researching them, they were not an endangered species. Now they're designated as a separate species. So I just really wanted to get that information out there. So I really understood the importance of outreach, and I was always motivated by conservation. With the forest elephant, they are in huge decline because of poaching, not because of really to alleviate their decline, we just need to stop poaching them. It's not habitat loss or anything like that. So it's a real human problem, and the solutions are in government, economics. It really studying the elephant itself doesn't really help that much. So I really understood the importance of people in conservation. I also was working with kids. I was part of a community science project where we were working with teachers to get science into classrooms, or to get community science into classrooms. So kids would learn science by doing real science. And then I also learned that when kids have emotional connections with nature, that it's more likely to make them lifelong environmentalists or conservationists. So I became really interested at that angle. So I started blogging a lot. I started doing a lot of outreach. And then at the same time, I was also having a hard time getting a permanent job. And this was something that people were talking about, like my colleagues were talking about, not me, but all of us were struggling getting a job. But in graduate school, nobody told us that. Like I knew being a professor was incredibly competitive, but I didn't know that government jobs, I mean, any wildlife job, I didn't know was competitive. So I was really shocked that I would get interviews, but then in one case, I was somebody else who had 10 years of experience on me, was considered as part of a job search with along with me. So I couldn't compete with that. And I just realized how competitive it was out there. So I started blogging about this, and that really resonated with a lot of people because it's not something that people want to talk about. Nobody wants to advertise that they can't get a job. But I knew because of my friends, I wasn't the only one. So then I just eventually decided to make this a full-time career. I was listening to a lot of podcasts to help with my outreach, and I learned about people that made livings off of blogging, and I was like, "Oh, I could do that with science communication and creating programs for people for career mentoring," because I really loved both of those things. And although professors are great at teaching the concepts, they don't have the time or really the wherewithal. They don't understand the job market. So I saw that I could provide a lot of value to people. So it was sort of a slow transition that I realized I really liked doing these things. And then in 2020, right before the pandemic, I decided to go full time doing this and start my own business.
Very cool. It's really cool to hear your journey sort of throughout your education and to where you are now. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that this was sort of a seed that was planted way back in your PhD, and you just
Mhm.
kind of kept following that passion and ended up here at Fancy Scientist and getting to talk to us about it today. Very cool.
We all understand when it comes to graduating from grad school and looking at the job market. It just was like,
Yep.
oh man, like, is it me? Is there anything that I did wrong? Is it like, oh, did I have something in my teeth? All that jazz and everything. But I know you're inspiring a lot of people to get into the field
Oh,
that you're
thank you.
into now with your the sort of program that you have. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's called the what is it? The successful wildlife professional.
Yes.
Um, what common challenges like do they face, and what is within your program that helps them face those kinds of challenges and obstacles?
I mean, the biggest challenge that people face is getting a job. That's really it. And as you mentioned, it's surprising because for STEM careers especially, we're getting all this information that there's so much demand for or there's lack of people for STEM jobs, and there's a lot of STEM jobs. But it depends on what area. So engineering, yes, or industry jobs like medical, research and develop, yes, there's a lot of jobs. But in my field, there's definitely jobs, but there's just more and more people who want to go into those jobs. So it's just become a really saturated field. So it's not uncommon for you to be competing against honestly hundreds of people. It's really common for jobs to have at least 100 applicants, sometimes hundreds. So just landing that job is really the biggest problem, and the thing that I help them with is making sure that they are a good match to the job that they want. That's really the biggest advice, and that's the biggest kind of like mind-blowing moment for me, was that I had all this experience and I was kind of like a jack of all trades. Like I would do like a little bit of here, a little bit here, but I wasn't a strong expert in one thing. And then the thing I was actually an expert in with my PhD was people saw me as an elephant biologist or as a geneticist because I use non-invasive genetics to study elephants. And I just didn't really love genetics that much. And with elephant research, there just wasn't there weren't that many jobs. Of course you could become a professor, but I just wasn't really interested in being a professor. Um, and there are zoo jobs, but those are really rare. So it was just really hard to come across as jobs. So because it's so competitive, when you apply for jobs, employers can pick the person who is best suited for that job. So, although I was qualified to apply for jobs as like a carnivore biologist, because there was this one in Florida Panthers and I had telemetry experience. And although it was on Florida Panthers, I had telemetry experience working with elephants. But they probably had people who applied who already worked with carnivores in that capacity. So I always tell people to really understand the job that they want and then make sure that they get the experience that leads up to that, especially for the charismatic species, because those jobs are way more competitive. But I think this holds true for any job that you want, is to first really understand the job well, and then experience is really important. Whereas people think that once they get the degree, and I thought this with my PhD too. I thought like, oh, I have a PhD, and this is what I was told, that a PhD, you can solve, like that means you're a problem solver. But when I would apply for jobs at like the Nature Conservancy, I had never done like plant restoration work or vegetation surveys or anything like that. So even though I had a PhD and knew I could do it, they probably chose people who had that direct experience above me, even if they didn't have a PhD. That was another thing, is that sometimes, or a lot of times actually, a PhD can overqualify you for jobs. So really understanding the job, and that's what we do in the program. It's divided into 3 sections. There's a clarity section, strategy, and application. So clarity is understanding all the different job types and workplaces out there. In our field, even if you work within the government, your role and the things that you do can be different depending on what branch of government you work for. And then the strategy section is mostly about experience, getting the right education, and networking. And then the last part is also really important, the job application. They're all important, but most people tend to go wrong with not knowing what they want to do, and then also not writing a compelling job application. They'll write job applications that it's not that they're bad, but they're just not going to stand out. They're more generic, or they're more suited towards industry or business. They're not for wildlife jobs. Some of my students, we don't change anything at all. We just work on their job applications, and then they start getting jobs. So that alone can be a make or break factor. And they don't teach you how to do that in graduate school. They don't teach you how to market yourself and sell yourself to these jobs.
All of the advice you gave regarding this sort of like professional development and your mentorship program is really, really cool. But I'm wondering if you have any advice specifically for those that might be pursuing a career in wildlife conservation. Like you said, I think a lot of people probably don't even know what that is. As a scientist myself, but not a biologist, not in that field, I don't know what it is, and I totally believe that there are people who are studying it or who are considering a career in it that might not really know what all it entails. So is there any advice you'd give to people who want to pursue that path, especially if they might be on a more unconventional path like the one you took to get where you're at?
Yeah. So I would say to first really understand the jobs out there. So I do have a tool. It's called the Job Tracker. If you just go to fancyscientist.com and search Job Tracker, it's free. And it's just, I mean, it's a PDF, but it links you to a spreadsheet, and you just start like listing the jobs that you're interested in, and not worrying too much about like how much they pay, or if it's volunteering or not, and just sort of get an understanding of like what the jobs are and what they are like. So I would say that is really important. Getting experience is really, really important too. And a lot of people wait. So even if you're in like high school, you can get experience, and don't discount volunteering. Honestly, for our field, you pretty much have to volunteer. I know it's a big discussion now about, like some people might be at a disadvantage because they can't afford to volunteer, but you don't have to sacrifice your whole career. Like, you don't have to like give up everything and volunteer. You can volunteer on weekends, or you can volunteer a couple of hours here and there. Even doing something like community science. If you go to scistarter.org, there's so many community science projects on there, or like eBird. And if you do eBird in a systematic way, that's definitely something that you can put on your resume. So I would focus on understanding what it is you want to do, and getting experience. One of my students, when he first entered, he was really frustrated because he had his master's, and then when he was getting a job, basically he realized like like, oh, even though I have my master's, I still don't have the experience to get the job that I wanted. So he was technically trained, but a lot of the jobs, he was interested in pollinators. A lot of the jobs for pollinators required like project management experience. So when you use the job tracker or when you start tracking jobs on your own, like really pay attention to like the types of things that they want, because in graduate school, you're probably not going to get that. But if you know that, then you can build that into your program. Like you can talk to your advisor and be like, can we add a way into my project to add some project management experience? Or can I take a course on it or something? Or can I, volunteer for an organization for a couple of hours a week? So those are probably the two biggest things, is like really understand the jobs and get experience. I have this meme that I use a lot. I got it years ago, but it was like when that meme became popular of like what my parents think I do, what I think I do, what my
Mhm.
friends think I do, and somebody made one for wildlife careers, and like it has like Steve Irwin on there, and it has like somebody holding lion cubs, and like yeah, that's totally what people think it is, and Steve Irwin, he's not, at least to my knowledge, I don't know a ton about him, but he's not really a scientist. He was more of an educator, and he
Mhm.
worked at a zoo. He does have a couple of publications, but he wasn't conducting research. So like really, like if you want to be outside and that's really important to you, make sure you understand what is needed to get those jobs. Because if you get a PhD, it's really rare to have a PhD and be outside a lot. You're going to be instead usually behind a desk writing papers and grants and stuff, which is also a great job, but just know like it's different than what you might expect.
Yeah, that's great advice, and I hope helpful for our audience. And a sort of theme that I've picked up on, and the advice that you've given us so far is a lot of like being proactive, knowing what's out there,
Mhm.
and intentionally building yourself up to be a good fit for these things that you're discovering that you might want to do at some
Yeah,
point along your path.
absolutely.
Cool. And one question I had that touches on something you mentioned just now and something you brought up in the beginning is about community science. I think a lot of our audience might not be familiar with that. That's something that I only know a little bit about myself. So I was wondering if you can tell us more about what you mean when you say community science and how that sort of can help build up your experience in preparing yourself for your future job.
Sure. I love community science. It's also called citizen science, but the name I think there's nuances between it, but the name has mostly been changed because people were concerned that you would have to be an actual citizen of the United States to participate. It doesn't refer to that at all. It's just like you just live in a place and you get to participate in real science. That's what it is. But it's real scientific projects. So basically, for the most part, it's usually a way of crowdsourcing data and information. So I mentioned you can go to SciStarter, so that's like SCI starter.org, and you can search for projects around you in all the sciences. It's not just wildlife fields. And they're run by scientists. Usually you are involved in data collection or maybe data analysis. So for example, I brought up eBird. So if I wanted to do eBird right now, I could go outside my house and they have an app, and you count all the birds you see and hear, and you upload it into the app. And this helps scientists use those data to understand bird migration patterns all over the world. Some projects are global, like that one, and you can do without any hand holding. And then others are really local. Like some of them, you might actually get to meet the scientists, or you get to like work closely with the scientists. So I was able to work with the eMammal project. Now it's Wildlife Insights. So we worked with schools and volunteers of all kinds. But I worked mostly with teachers, and they would set up camera traps, which are these cameras designed to collect photos of wildlife. They're triggered by heat and motion. So it really helped us because as scientists, we're only limited to all the places we can go. But if we have people buy a camera trap, or if we can loan them a camera trap, then they set up their camera traps. around their schools or wherever they live. And this is also provides us access to places we normally wouldn't have access to, because a lot of these, by far, most of these are on private property. So, I can't just put a camera on somebody's lawn, but they can
Yeah.
put a camera on their lawn. And we get access to all this information about wildlife that uses private property, which is a vast majority of the United States. So a really important habitat for wildlife, and then we can study the animals and their behavior. And if you're interested in camera traps, there's so many citizen science camera traps on SciStarter where you can help identify the animals, or like maybe note their behavior. Some of them record behaviors and things like that. And then, yeah, the results are used in real scientific publications.
Cool. Yeah, so it sounds like a really cool opportunity to contribute to research and also get sort of like that hands-on experience at the same time. So to me, it sounds like a win-win.
Yeah, and it's fun too. So even if you're not 100% sold on this being a career, you can just do it for fun as well. You don't have to have any science training at all. You can just be a regular person.
Nice. That's good to know.
What are the roles or like skills, excuse me, skills are like very, very crucial to have before you even like step forth into conservation biology or even STEM biology?
I think if you really want to be in research, data analysis skills are huge. So math skills, honestly, being really great at math, and programming skills are really important as well. Statistical skills. When I first started my PhD, people were using SAS, which is a statistics program where it was more like you plug and play numbers. So you would like run a model and you would put in your numbers and stuff. But by the end, and then definitely when I was in my postdoc, um, we were using R, and people still use program R today, which is a little bit more plug and play. But back then it was more just like a black box where you like type in your code to run models. And in my postdoc, the one of our researchers, like she was like coming up with her own models and running them, which is like totally mind blowing to me. So really understanding statistics well, because and this is true across all scientific fields, but also our field, with the community science programs and just technology increasing, we have so much data now. So it's really like, how do we analyze and handle all of the data out there? So if yeah, like if we think about eBird, like people love birds. I think it's the most popular wildlife activity, birding. A lot of people use eBird. So they have, billions of data points about birds. How do you analyze the data? So that's incredibly important, and that requires coding to be able to run statistics, run these models. Do they have some really cool like data visualizations, which again is all coding. So those are really important skills. And then the other thing I would say is, I think communication is going to become a lot more important. I think historically it has. I feel like it's been devalued in science, or at least in my field. I remember when I was in graduate school, like being on Twitter was kind of seen as like a waste of time. But there has been, research showing mistrust in science and scientists. And I think people are now really recognizing like, and data don't work in changing minds. That's another thing is, I think for scientists at work, we see a graph, or, we do a study and we're like, oh, okay, we should do X, Y, Z. But a lot of people, that doesn't work. And well, even scientists, we're not completely unbiased. We do have our values and everything. So understanding how, not just like how to educate people, but how to frame things in a way that get people to understand an issue or relate to an issue or make it relate to them. Like climate change is a huge one, here in the United States, where some people don't think that it's been caused by man, even though the data suggests otherwise. So understanding how we can communicate messages better like that.
Are there other things within wildlife biology that you might have seen popping up more specifically? So maybe not just communications, but like a more niche area that we're seeing more need for these days, or that has become more popular since maybe since you finished school or since you finished your postdoc?
Another thing that we haven't talked about is probably the role of AI. I'm not as on top of AI, but I definitely know, and this is more tangential to wildlife careers, more of an engineering, computer science type of background, but definitely STEM careers. But when I was working with Wildlife Insights, Wildlife Insights is an initiative. It's a collaborative initiative between major conservation organizations. It started with Conservation International. And it was this idea to bring all the camera trap data together, because scientists were running their own projects, but there should be a central database so that instead of if scientists were working on a single species, they could access data collected by other scientists and then do more of a meta-analysis, or maybe use some of the data to complement their study. And then as a whole, Wildlife Insights could analyze the data collected by all the scientists to understand worldwide wildlife patterns. And one of the things that we did is work with Google to create software to automatically identify species to reduce the load for scientists, because we were talking about community science and camera traps. So we've already been using volunteers to identify the animals. But volunteers, you do need a certain identification to make sure a species is accurate. And with AI, some species they can identify really easily. So, for example, when we were in North Carolina, half of the wildlife pictures are white-tailed deer, and there's really no other animal that looks like a white-tailed deer in North Carolina except for elk, and that's only in a couple of areas in the West. So we know that, like when we get a picture and AI says that it's deer, that it's deer. So just by getting rid of those pictures and not looking at them, then that reduces our workload by 50%. So those are some other jobs that are popping up, is using AI or computer programming to help reduce our workload. I've seen it also used in behavioral research or surveys as well too. I actually saw this really cool video on LinkedIn the other day where it was a video of fish and the AI was like tracking the fish and counting the different species. Whereas before, you probably had a researcher like actually manually count the fish and like pause in between frames and things like that. So those are some other really exciting opportunities.
Cool. And going back to maybe communication and sort of along the lines of the evolution of the field and just kind of the evolution of science in general, this is something that you touched on a little bit, where it's really important to include people who are, traditionally absent from these types of conversations. But also an important element of this scientific communication is being able to relate to people and being able to talk to people in a way that they understand, and not just, throwing data and facts at people, but engaging them in conversation. So do you have any advice, or can you share more about your experience with talking to people about science, and particularly these topics in science that today can be a little bit more polarizing or a little bit more, taken the wrong way? Do you have any experience with talking to people, engaging larger audiences in these types of conversations?
No, that's a really good question. Most of my work has been on animals, so people are kind of more open-minded and excited about
Cool.
animals. I don't have to deal with the controversial topics as much. It is challenging. I do think it's important to listen. I think that's really important. I once went to a conference. It was I think a marketing conference. I can't remember. It was just in Raleigh, and I went because my friends were going and stuff. But I went to this talk, and I can't remember exactly what she said, but it was something along the lines of people want to be, I think, be seen. They want to be made to feel smart. And there's one more thing. I know I should have had this memorized. But so that's really important, I think, is to like listen to other people um and to give to listen, yeah, to listen to what they have to say and to listen to their point of view. And it can be hard when on our side the evidence doesn't match up to that. That can be really hard. Like, so for example, a more silly or not silly, but like not a serious example is I have this video with Black Panthers in the United States. Like, it's like, are there Black Panthers in the United States? And the answer, based on our data is no, because we have all these camera traps set all over. We never get Black Panthers. So Black Panthers are there. It's a condition. It's a melanism, which turns. It's a genetic condition that turns mammals fur black. So you can have it happen in other animals, but it usually happens in leopards and jaguars. So we used to have jaguars here in the United States. We have a couple, like literally a couple. There's like 4 or something in Arizona that show up once in a while. But we don't have jaguars anymore. We don't have leopards. There's no leopards here. And there's never been melanism in a mountain lion. There's no mountain lions in the East anymore, except for in Florida. So we have no evidence at all. Like, there's no camera trap pictures or anything. And where you do have melanistic leopards or jaguars, you do see them on camera traps. So we've had camera traps in Southeast Asia, and we get melanistic leopards. So it's not like they're avoiding the cameras or anything. But you like talk about this, and then people have on my videos, they have like all these comments about all these people who've seen Black Panthers, and it's hard to be like no, like it can't be a Black Panther.
Yeah.
I mean, there could be instances, like we do live in the United States, and people do own exotic animals, so it is possible to escape. But for that many people to have seen that many escaped exotics, it's hard to believe. So it can be really, really challenging. But I think listening is really important, and finding common ground, I think, is really important as well. Finding things that you both believe. So when we're talking about climate change or something, instead of maybe focusing as much on the science behind it or like what's going on, like people across all lines can agree, especially those living in their area, that like drought is going on. Like farmers aren't in denial about drought going on, or
Mhm.
like land shifting or things like that. So focusing on like what we can understand, but yeah, I think like relating it to people's daily lives, I think, is really important as well. But that's something I'm incredibly interested in. And another recommendation is I would tell people to read the book called Think Again by Adam Grant. I actually want to do a podcast episode on it, especially post-election. And it's a lot about listening to people, because what happens is if you come like really hard down on something, then that can like dig people more in their heels on the other side of something. So kind of like wanting to have those conversations, even if your data suggests what they think isn't true, still having the conversations and understanding where they're coming from, and understanding why they're feeling a certain way. So when it comes to something like with vaccines, maybe they're not, and actually the Think Again book does use an example with vaccines. So maybe it's not that they're so like anti-vaccines, but maybe it's more that there's some problem going on with their child and people aren't listening. People aren't. So it's like maybe like that vaccine is easier to blame, but there really is a health concern, and they're feeling like they're being dismissed by the scientific community. So I think listening is so important, and validating the way that people feel about things is also important. And it does take time to shift cultural norms as well. And then also like, yeah, like getting at the root of the problem too. So for wolves out west, a lot of people hate wolves, whereas people who don't live amongst wolves in the East, they love wolves, and there's a lot of tension there. But wolves, it's not as much about like the wolf when you actually understand the problem, and more about like the government intervention and the fact that government would impose their way of thinking on the local peoples, point of view. So they kind of like take it out on the wolf, but it might not be the wolf that they're so upset about. It could be other things. So really understanding like how people are thinking, how people are feeling, and what's underneath the surface issue.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and hopefully something that even if, members of our audience who are not necessarily pursuing a career in science communication,
Mhm.
I think these are lessons that all of us as STEM professionals and honestly as humans can take with us and sort of strengthen the conversations that we have with people and strengthen our ability
Mhm.
to share information and to sort of push the future forward as I like to think about it.
I looked at your bio and you're like in a lot of stuff. You was in the History Channel. And before I saw that, it's just like, the Discovery Channel. I was like, okay. And then it's just all this stuff. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, she's in everywhere. That's awesome. I'm just like, what's next for you? What do you have next? Are you going to Disney World next?
I did do an internship in Disney World, actually. I loved that job. I would love to go back to Disney World. But yeah, actually, I worked at Animal Kingdom in one of their labs in studying the hormones of different animals. That was like one of the best jobs I ever had. But what's next for me? I really want to just keep producing science communication content. I'm still really passionate about that. You're right. I have done TV shows. I would love my own TV show. That's like a dream of mine one day, to do some sort of nature based conservation show. What I honestly would like to do to make it different is I'm honestly not a huge fan of wildlife documentaries because I feel like they're always so sad and serious. And now, ever since I had my moment in Kenya where I realized the importance of people, and then especially in North Carolina, honestly, I did a lot of like urban ecology. So I would love to do more like of a wildlife documentary, a wildlife show about like the interaction of animals and people. Like I was really struck when I watched Planet Earth and they did this scene with birds of paradise and it looked to be like this like remote area, and then I watched the making of and it was in somebody's backyard, and so I thought that was so cool. So like more stuff like that where like people are like living alongside animals and maybe there's conflict like and things like that. And then I started this kids program a couple of years ago. I did it again, I think the year before last, and I want to start it again, but I want to make it more like how I did in the original program. But as I mentioned earlier in the interview, I think kids are really the key for conservation, and I'm really passionate about getting people outside. And not only if we get kids outside, will that raise future conservationists, but being outside is so important for them. There's immense health benefits for them, mental, emotional, and physical benefits for them being outside. So I'm really passionate about that. And this kids program I'm starting again in January would basically be videos, like short videos and activities for parents to teach how to get their kids inside. I really want to incorporate the community science aspect of it because when I worked with kids in middle school classrooms, they really liked working with the camera traps, but they took it really seriously because they knew the data was going towards for science. They knew that real scientists were going to use the data. So I really want to create a program where they can learn about going outside and doing birding and things like that, but then actually like do eBird and submit their data and use the platform to explore the data and follow that bird, like where the bird that they saw, like it's actually going all the way down to Brazil, and have them understand what's going on with the plants and animals around them. So those are my next steps in life.
Having those experiences where you worked the Animal Kingdom, you see all the visual effects that played in that part can tie into how you can, when it comes to presenting your projects or your program and everything, could be appealing towards audience members.
Yeah, that's why I use the name fancy scientist, because I've always like looked this way. I've always been more like stereotypically feminine. I've like makeup and dressing up, and then and my dad's a jeweler, so I've always like jewelry. And when I started working with teachers, well, first in graduate school, I felt like an outsider because like people would wear like field clothes to the office. I was like in makeup. I mean, I wasn't like super dressed up, but I was like in makeup and, jewelry and stuff. So I kind of like dulled myself down a little bit and didn't dress up as much, but I just didn't feel like I was me. And then at the museum, both in the museum and at Animal Kingdom, I actually worked in a glass lab so people could see the scientists. And so I really wanted people to see me dressed up because I wanted, just like kids to see like, oh, a scientist can be like dressed up and be sciency, or you can like more frivolous things like sparkles and clothes and things, and you don't have to fit this one stereotype. So yeah, like moving forward with a TV show, like I would love to do something like that, incorporating multiple worlds, that you don't have to be so serious about things, or you can blend different worlds of things. It doesn't have to be one way.
And on that note, we've heard a lot about your interests today. We've heard a lot about this passion that you have for science communication, for mentorship, for the elephants, for wildlife biology. But I'm curious if there is one big thing you're really curious about, whether it's something that we've already talked about, or something that just keeps you up at night, or related to your field, just related to the world. What is it that's always on your mind?
Honestly, I think what we were just talking about, like how people form the values that they do, how to like shift perspectives, that especially post-election, I'm really
Mhm.
interested in that, like how people become who they are essentially. Like I always went into this career because because I was a conservationist. I really cared about wildlife. I really cared about protecting the planet. So how did I get to be that way? And like, how can more people become that way? And yeah, like how can we talk to people who come from different backgrounds, who might not think the same as us? I'm also just like fascinated by just in general, like how we do things. And I always like maximizing um I guess like efficiency and like productivity, but not from like a hustle mentality, but like from more of an empowering mentality. So like understanding like how we talk to ourselves and what can we say to ourselves that like lift us up and make us better human beings. So I'm really interested in like brain research and yeah, like all that type of stuff. That definitely keeps me up at night. Mindset type of stuff I really, really am interested in.
Yeah, that's super interesting and really cool to hear from your perspective. And, I think there's these things that kind of get to us in our personal lives, things that we're personally curious about, but that will long term, and if we're all thinking about these kind of things, will have a pretty big impact on, STEM and sort of the future of research and how we interact with science and how science helps us as a people.
Mhm.
But with that, we just wanna thank you for joining us today. It's been a really great discussion. We've gotten to learn so
Oh,
much about your path, about your background, and also about, what opportunities there might be out there for people in our audience who are interested in these types of careers, or who are, looking for their next job, or who are just looking for a little bit of advice or a cool, unique perspective. So, thanks again, Stephanie. It was really great to have you, and we appreciate you being here with us.
oh, thank you so much. I had so much fun talking to both of you too.